Well, we know government backbenchers are supporting a call to scrap Section 18C, the Racial Discrimination Act it's known as. What about frontbenchers? That's the key question now, because so far Malcolm Turnbull has not really entertained it, albeit there have been some murmurs about perhaps reining this in, looking into it a little bit more closely. And one of the organisations that's been driving this perhaps the most is the Institute of Public Affairs. Simon Breheny from the IPA joins me now from Melbourne. Simon, thanks for your time. As I said, we got a strong flavour from some backbenchers about this. What's your take on the appetite of the front bench and, of course, the man at the top, most importantly?
Yeah, look, there has been quite a lot of movement on this, particularly in recent times. It wasn't too long ago that there were only 4 Senate backbenchers or crossbenchers who were supporting removing a couple of words from that provision, offend and insult, and making sure that freedom of speech was restored in Australia. And now we've got 20. Every coalition backbencher has signed up to this bill that was put forward earlier in the year by Senator Corey Bernardi to repeal at least those 2 words. So I think you're right. I think the debate then moves to the House of Representatives and it moves to where the government is on this. My sense is that there's actually quite a bit of support. There's quite a lot of support for changing Section 18C. The position of the Institute of Public Affairs is to repeal 18C in its entirety. Frankly, I don't see much prospect of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and the government supporting that position. But certainly I think the compromise position of removing the words offend and insult from Section 18C is one that is growing because of some of the cases that we've seen in recent times. So when you've got students at Queensland University of Technology...
Sorry, are you having discussions with, say, front benchers? You know, how high up is this going? Because it's, first of all, I suppose, a willingness to want to make the change, but also to spend some political capital on this.
Yeah, look, of course, you know, those discussions are going on all the time. I think, frankly, you know, there's a lot of support out in the community for changing Section 18C, and I think one of the things that is lost in this debate is just how important freedom of speech is to Australians. Watch this space. In the coming weeks, we will have more on this, but certainly I think when you go and ask Australians, do you care about freedom of speech, there's a lot of support for it. So I just don't accept this position that it's a marginal issue, that it's not important, it shouldn't be at the centre of the political discussion. Frankly, I think it's an incredibly important discussion to have. And when you see these cases of kids at Queensland University of Technology being hit under Section 18C for making really what is innocuous Facebook banter, when you see cartoonists at the Australian in Bill Leak being dragged through the Human Rights Commission process under Section 18C, there's a lot to be said for reforming this law. So I think that these are the reasons
further
why
to that, though, a lot of the recent cases seem to be less about the fact that, you know, they're getting found guilty of having to pay out at the end of the whole thing, but more about perhaps the process. And that's what the Executive Council of Australian Jury is saying, that they want to change in the process, but not the definitions. They don't want what they say could be a green flag, perhaps, to racism. And as well, what's always pointed out is 18D, the protections to all of this. So would you agree that a big part of this change could be the process itself, by the way the complaints are handled?
Yeah, look, one of the really shocking things about the QUT case is it went on, the investigation went on for 3 years, and then the judge, the Federal Court Judge Michael Jarrett, threw the case out for not being substantive enough. But of course, this was after there'd been negotiations with the university directly. There'd been a process through the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission has said that there was substance to the case, and that's why they were continuing with their investigation. So the really sad thing about it for these kids is, yes, there was a really significant issue with the process, but that process question goes right to the heart of Section 18C, because the reason why these processes are taking as long as they are, the reason why these kids are being subject of a complaint in the first place, is because the threshold for 18C is set so low. If it's unlawful to offend someone, if that's the basis on which you can make a complaint, of course you're going to see these complaints made, because it's really easy to. So I just don't think the process, fixing the process fixes the issue. It's much more fundamental than that.
Okay. We'll see where it goes, of course, even if the government decides to act on it. There's the Senate as well, like a lot of things in this parliament. I'd like to ask you about this Essential poll out yesterday. It asked voters, would they be likely to vote for another Conservative party, a breakaway one, if, quote, the likes of Tony Abbott were in this party. Now, of LNP voters, 43% said they would be likely to vote for such a party. Do you think the Liberal National Party needs to be concerned of this type of breakaway party?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think what we've seen in the UK in recent times, what we've seen in the US with the rise of Donald Trump, is a warning sign to conservative politics right around the world. And I think that if you're involved in a conservative party, if you're involved in a centre-right party, anywhere in the Western world, you would be looking at results like that and wondering how things could change, how things could happen in Australia. I think you'd be silly to ignore that. And so I think the Essential poll yesterday, 23% overall, and as you say, 43% of coalition voters, really sounds a warning bell for coalition, because we're already seeing this happening. I mean, Pauline Hanson has got 4 senators. We're seeing more and more of that vote, particularly in parts of the country that feel left behind by the political class, moving to parties like that. And I don't see that changing. I would be very surprised if Pauline Hanson didn't end up with at least one more senator if she doesn't have some success in the lower house. So, yeah, absolutely. I think this surge is coming, and the coalition should be on top of it.
Okay, and the IPA, I mean, is often to the right, it would be fair to say, of the Liberal Party, broadly speaking. So what would you think of a breakaway party? What do you hear around the traps of those discussions? Is it something that you hope happens?
Oh, we're certainly on the free market side of the Liberal Party a lot of the time. We're trying to pull all political parties in that direction, because we understand the benefits of free markets to people right around the world. So, yeah, look, I think I would like to see the signal that this sends flow into policy pronouncements that are made by the government. That, I think, would be a really positive thing. I don't think that there's a prospect of people like Tony Abbott breaking away from the coalition and creating their own party. But I do think that it does send a signal about ignoring basically what is essentially the coalition base. You can't ignore them on issues of freedom of speech. You shouldn't ignore them on economic issues, because we've seen the ramifications of that in the United States. So I think that's the signal that this poll sends.
Okay, some would say already there's been an influence on Malcolm Turnbull and his policy. We'll see what the new year brings. But Simon Breheny, thanks for your time on PVO Newsday.
Pleasure.